After the last Muslim kingdom collapsed in 1492, the Spanish crown attempted to forcibly convert the remaining Muslim population to Christianity. As the Christian kingdoms gradually took over the Muslim kingdoms one by one over the centuries, Muslims and Christians lived together for the most part. However, after the Nasrid kingdom fell in 1492, the Muslims in the city of Granada attempted and failed at a revolt after they accused their new overlords of not abiding by the Treaty of Granada of 1491. This included the fundamental right to freely practice their religion. This was known as the First Rebellion of the Alpujarras, which lasted from 1499 to 1501. The failed revolt gave the Catholic kingdoms justification to repudiate the treaty they had made 8 years earlier. The Moriscos were Muslims who were forcibly converted to Christianity after the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia fell in 1492. They were gradually forced to convert, although they had never fully converted to their new religion, as much of their practices and beliefs were still followed in defiance to the Catholic Church and the Spanish kingdom. They remained in Spain until their final expulsion in 1614. But did you know these Moriscos staged a rebellion during this time in what will become known to history as the second and more famous rebellion of the Alpujarras? This occurred between 1568 until 1571 and was centered in the Andalusia-Granada region. The reasons for the rebellion lie in the treatment of the Moriscos, stretching from 1526 when the King of Spain, Charles V, issued the edict which ordered that Muslims and cultural Morisco-related practices committed by the so-called New Christians would be severely repressed. However, the Moriscos managed to delay this until the 1560s, when members of the Catholic Church decided to finally enforce the edict with Philip II's approval, as signs of crypto-Muslims showed no indications of stopping, as well as the secret adherence to Muslim customs and traditions. The Moriscos appealed with little to no success. The seeds for a large-scale rebellion would begin to sprout. The Moriscos realized that since their situation grew worse by the day and the heavy restrictions on their way of life began to frustrate them, they attempted to negotiate with the authorities. However, after a year of pointless negotiations, the Moriscos of Granada arranged meetings in the Albaythine quarters of Granada, away from the watchful eye of the authorities. They decided to take up arms. However, they had nothing, their weapons confiscated, no military training or defensive forts, and they were up against foes that were seen as one of the most powerful monarchies in Europe, one with an ever-expanding army and naval power. This seemingly powerful illusion did not equal reality. The truth was that Spain's leaders had exhausted their finances, leaving their army inexperienced and left them raising troops unfamiliar with new weaponry. The Barbary coasts were ravaged with pirates who were eager to take the opportunity to pillage at any given time. The Moriscos of Albaythine would of course be aware of the enemy's predicament. The Moriscos were hopeful that they could stage a good fight. They knew their natural terrain well, and they believed that they could have a fighting force of well over 100,000 men, as well as aid from the Ottomans in North Africa. They also had a storage of weapons, oil, flowers and armour, hidden from the Christian authorities in secret caves, with enough supplies to last at least 5 years if need be. With the ban of Moorish-style clothing taking effect on the first day of 1568, the rebellious Moriscos decided that this was the time to ignite the spark. The feelings of the Moriscos are well portrayed in a ballad composed by Muhammad ben Muhammad Ibn Daud, one of the leaders of the uprising. Here is a short extract taken from the ballad. Listen while I tell the story of sad Andalusia's fate, peerless once and world-renowned in all that makes a nation great. Prostrate now and compassed round by heretics with cruel force. We, her sons like driven sheep, or horsemen or unbridled horse. Torture is our daily portion, subtle craft our soul's resource. Till we welcome death to free us from a fate that's ever worse. They have set the Jews to watch us, Jews that know no truth nor faith. Every day some new device they frame to work us further scathe. We are forced to worship them in Christian rites unclean, to adore their painted idols, mockery of the great unseen. No one dares to make remonstrance, no one dares to speak a word. Who can tell the anguish wrought on us, the faithful of the Lord? When the bell tolls, we must gather to adore the image foul. In the church the preacher rises, harsh-voiced as a screaming owl. He the wine and pork invoked, and the masses wrought with wine. Falsely humble, he proclaimed that this is the Lord divine. The 16th of April witnessed a false alarm that the Moriscos had risen as the men assembled in arms. The corregidors placed guards on the streets leading to the Morisco quarters of Granada. However, due to heavy rain, the streets were impossible to navigate. The rumours of a revolt also resulted in the Christian townsfolk looting some Morisco homes in the city. At the same time, the Moriscos asked for aid to the King of Fez, but the letter was intercepted by local authorities and sent to the royal court. They pleaded for assistance, but King Philip brushed away their appeals and relied on reports indicating that the Moriscos were submissive, with no danger to be anticipated. No troops were to be sent. On the 23rd of December 1568, a man by the name of Fareh Aben Fareh, along with 150 men, broke into one of the city gates and attempted to incite the people into rebellion. But the people did not take action, and so Fareh and his men slipped away the next morning. However, the following day would see 182 places revolt in arms all over Granada. For the first time since the late 1490s, the Moriscos had openly confessed their identity as Muslims. These crypto-Muslims of the mountains, so eager to take revenge and ease their grudges, finally unleashed in their frustrations, as this Christian source, written by historian Luis de Marmol Carvajal in 1600, captures the anger in the atmosphere when the Moriscos openly rebelled. They robbed, burnt and destroyed the churches. They hacked venerable images to pieces. They pulled the altars down and laid their violent hands on the priests of Jesus Christ, who had taught them the faith and administered the sacraments to them. The priests were dragged through the streets and public squares, barefoot and naked, and held up to mockery and insult. Some they shot with arrows, others they burnt alive and exposed to various kinds of martyrdom. They treated with the same cruelty those Christians who were not priests who lived in their villages. A neighbour who had no respect for his neighbour, nor did a compadre respect his fellow, or a friend's friend. If anybody wanted to be merciful, it was not allowed. So great was the wrath of the evil men who killed everybody they set their hands on. All those who gave themselves up were killed too, because they wanted no Christian above the age of 10 to remain alive in all the land. The rebellion had stretched into a full-scale war that engulfed the whole former Nasrid kingdom. The Spanish force consisted of royal troops, as well as feudal levies and urban militias led by a dozen generals, the most famous being Don John of Austria, half-brother of Philip II. The Muslim side provided itself an Umayyad pretender of the throne, Fernando de Valo Aben Humayya, who was previously a Granadan town councillor, as well as other Granadan commanders supported by military experts from Ottoman Algeria. In January 1569, a Spanish army under the command of Marquis of Mondejar secured the important bridge at Twilight. The bridge was partially destroyed, yet the Spaniards managed to cross over and subsequently secured the mountains of the Alpujarra in a series of operations that left Abu Humayya and his fellow leader, El Saghir, as nothing more than bandits evading capture. The rebels were on the brink of surrender by March 1569. Despite his successes, the Mondejar was replaced by King Philip and handed supreme command to Don John of Austria in 1570, who was a young 23-year-old full of confidence. Internal rifts between the commanders, but also troops encouraged by booty rather than victory, allowed the Muslims to regroup, and the rebellion spread to the mountains of Almeria and Malaga in the west. To overcome this, on the 19th of October, King Philip enacted a stance of guerra a fuego y a sangre, and allowed the soldiers to plunder whatever they wished, including taking slaves. The Moriscos were determined to fight rather than surrender. It is important to note, however, that the Moriscos were themselves divided, as they were in the prior century. A leader could not take the risk of negotiating without his fellow comrades believing him to save his own skin. The Turks who had been sent from Algiers, although it is questionable whether they were actually ethnic Turks, also caused mistrust and division. Abu Humayya and the so-called Turks distrusted each other. A prominent Muslim by the name of Diego al-Guathir was known to hate Abu Humayya for abducting a widowed cousin of his. Al-Guathir played on Abu Humayya's tensions with the Turks and supplied hashish, something the Turks had the custom of taking before going to battles. Al-Ghathri claimed to have given some to Abu Humayya, who would allegedly use it to put the Turkish captains to sleep and kill them in the middle of the night. Al-Ghathri passed this rumour to the Turks, who were already angry and suggested removing Abu Humayya. The Turks, however, refused, saying they were sent in to assist the king of the Andalusians, not to be king themselves. A compromise had been made. Abu Humayya would be replaced by someone more competent and with the interests of the Muslims. On the 20th of October 1569, Abu Humayya was strangled to death in his bed and replaced by his cousin Abu Abu. By 1570, the Morisco numbers rose dramatically from 4,000 to just over 25,000 and were up against the newly promoted supreme command of Don John of Austria. Don John launched a fresh campaign with 12,000 men and was backed by the Duke of Sessa's 8,000 soldiers and over 300 horsemen. They had successfully captured the surrounding villages in the Pitre region and by February took Galera after a 2-month siege, as well as Saron the following month. The success of these armies saw great destruction and brutality. Many prisoners, including women and children, were either killed or taken as slaves. Don John, however, faced mass desertions with a third of his force disappearing. Despite this, he cleared the valley around the city of Almanzora, and on the 8th of August he informed King Philip that he would round up more forces to launch his next offensive. As Don John saw success, he met up with the Duke of Sessa's armies, and they prepared to launch their next offensive, this time into the Alpujarra mountains themselves. From 1570 until March of 1571, the combined armies of the Catholic forces swiftly defeated the Muslim rebels from village to village, slaughtering anyone who had come in their way. As a result of the success of the royal troops, the Muslims split into 2 branches, whether to surrender or carry on fighting, perhaps in vain. Realizing this, Abu Abu agreed to surrender terms, but when Berbers from North Africa informed him of large reinforcements arriving, he decided to continue the fight. These reinforcements never arrived. This misunderstanding resulted in the royal troops continuing their offences well into the winter of 1570. By May of 1571, large numbers of men from the mountains came down and surrendered, though many still hesitated and questioned the victors' promises of sparing them. The split in the Muslim camp would result in irreversible damage and a final blow to the rebellion. Al-Abaqi, a senior leader, had already offered surrender terms with the Spanish crown. Due to his position of agreeing to surrender, he thought he had protection from Don John himself. So when he arrived at the village of Yehin after meeting with Don John, he asked a group of men who were crowded in the village square why they did not prepare to offer their surrender. To which the reply was they were waiting on the orders of Abu Abu. Al-Abaqi then stated the surrender terms were right for all, and if Abu Abu did not accept this, he would bring him tied to the tail of his horse. When news of this reached the ears of Abu Abu, he ordered bodyguards to surround and raid Al-Abaqi's house. But he had narrowly escaped capture from the back gate. All in vain, however, as he was identified and picked up the next day, accused of treason, strangled in secrecy and his body dumped in a dunghill. Abu Abu was determined to continue. He had pleaded for assistance, to which his pleas were answered as a fresh batch of men arrived from North Africa. It was clear by early 1571 that the combined armies of the Catholic forces easily overwhelmed the few thousand rebels who kept on fighting. Clearly defeated, Abu Abu hid from one cave to another and only a few loyalists remained, one being a secretary, Bernardo Abu Ahmed, as well as a famous bandit in his own right, Gonzalo El Cenis. El Cenis had a long-standing grudge against Abu Abu. He had even offered to turn him in if he was given a promise of pardon. Abu Abu caught wind of this treachery and confronted Cenis in a cave in the mountains between Barchul and Messina de Bombaron. The confrontation ended up with Abu Abu being hit in the head with the butt of a gun, to which Cenis finished him off as he lay on the floor. Cenis threw the corpse of Abu Abu from a steep hill outside the cave. Abu's secretary Bernardino Abu Ahmed was caught by the authorities and killed. Abu Abu's body was paraded on a horse and brought to the Duke of Acros and Tudela in Granada. It is said that his head was put in a cage for 30 years, overlooking the very mountains that hosted the rebellion. And so ended the fate of the man who would be the last Muslim ruler of any part of the Iberian Peninsula. The war had a profound and lasting impact on the remaining Morisco population of Spain. Although not many took up arms in the grand scheme of things, it was more than enough to cause the Spanish monarchy to divert attention and resources to crush the rebellion. Many Moriscos across southern Spain sympathized with the rebellion despite not participating. Already by March of 1570, the deportation and relocation of an estimated 80,000 Moriscos of the Kingdom of Granada was put into motion. They were exiled to the rest of Spain. The long term, however, would see a slow discussion of what to do with the Moriscos. Many theories were proposed, which eventually led to the outright expulsion of virtually all of the remaining Morisco population of the country. The estimated Morisco population was anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million out of a total population of 8 million. Muslim presence was most strong in the regions of Valencia and Aragon. There were critics to this even at the time. For example, the humanist Pedro de Valencia criticized the government policy, writing, "Let us not fear that the blood of Spaniards will be infected by being mixed with the Moors." He also argued that this was unchristian and the policy was that of greed and jealousy. Though the expulsion of the Moriscos is a whole topic for another day, the edict decreed by King Philip III that Moriscos, be they new Christians or still Muslims, were to be expelled from their country in April 1609, and by the 20th of February 1614, the king was informed of the completion of the Morisco expulsion. The religion of Islam, present in the area since 711, was finally driven out in 1614, a total of 903 years. A final and quiet end to the Muslims' once flourishing centre of art, science and culture in Spain. The British Orientalist Stanley Lane-Poole, in his book The Moors in Spain, gives his view on what came after. The brief brilliancy of Ferdinand and Isabella and of the empire of Charles V could found no such enduring prominence. The Moors were banished. For a while Christian Spain shone like the moon with a borrowed light. Then came the eclipse, and in that darkness Spain has grovelled ever since. They did not understand that they had killed their own goose. It is estimated that about 40% of Moriscos managed to stay in Spain who were more than assimilated and blended with the culture around them. Many were also saved by influential figures in the area but were also kept hidden by sympathetic people. Many even managed to return to their homeland years after the official expulsion, refusing to leave their homeland. Ultimately, the Spanish crown had given up in expelling every Morisco down to the last man. The fate of the exiles, on the other hand, was probably much worse than their lives were in their homeland. Many settled in North Africa, the Ottoman regions, France, and some even ended up in Italy. The exiles had suffered a lot. Some were robbed when they arrived on the coasts, some killed or even taken as slaves by Barbary pirates who did not see them as their own, though some did eventually settle and flourished in their new homelands. The following account by the Algerian Morocco historian Ahmed al-Makari sums up the situation of the exiles. When the Christians in 1609 expelled them, thousands of them left for Fez, and as many again went to Tlemcen through Wahran, the great mass going to Tunis. As they made their way in the regions of Fez and of Tlemcen, they were harassed by the nomadic Arabs and others who had no fear of God, who robbed them of their property. Only a few escaped this disgraceful scandal. On the other hand, those who went to the region of Tunis were for the most part safe, and they still to this day inhabit villages in the countryside there. This was also true of those who went to Tetuan, to Salah, and to the Algerian Matija. A great number took service with the Sultan of the Maghrib and settled in Salah, conducting the holy war against the enemies of the faith by sea, as is well known at the present time. They turned the castles at Salah into a fortress and built palaces, baths and houses, and there they live at the present time. Some groups reached Constantinople and Egypt and Syria and other Muslim lands where they live in the way described. Allah, as the most generous of all, has granted the earth to those who dwell thereon as an inheritance.